25 accidents, 7 levels. I've spent hours compiling some of the most disturbing sports accidents ever caught on television. We'll start with a few near misses and gradually uncover incidents so brutal you'll pull your kids from sports. So let's start at the tip of the iceberg. Level 1. An unfortunate comeback. On June 15, 2013, in the 5th inning of a Major League Baseball game at Tropicana Field, Alex Cobb threw a pitch to Eric Hosmer, not knowing that this would be his last for the game. The game was between the Tampa Bay Rays and the Kansas City Royals. The Rays were leading and Alex Cobb was sent in to pitch while Eric Hosmer was on strike. As Alex threw the ball, Eric swung and the ball came back toward the mound in a sharp line drive. It struck Alex in the right ear and he was knocked down to the mound.
Expecting impact, and he got...
Oh, look out, a shot right back at Cobb.
The stadium went quiet as Alex lay on the ground with his hands clutching his head and legs flailing in pain. Players from both teams rushed in. Eric paused at first base, realizing the gravity of the situation and feeling guilty over that unintentional hit. But what makes this moment heavier is the timing. Only 5 days before this game, the Rays were playing against the Boston Red Sox when Alex's grandmother died and he had to pause mid-series. This was his first game back since that loss, and it had already taken an unexpected turn. Following the injury, medical staff stabilized him on the field and placed him on a stretcher. The game eventually resumed, but the tone had changed. At Bayfront Medical Center, Alex was diagnosed with a mild concussion, but thankfully all scans came out normal. However, he still had to stay overnight and was placed on the 7-day concussion disabled list, which was absolutely necessary, as the days that followed were marked by persistent vertigo and balance issues. I mean, you got the hit in the ear, the, little tubes in there what help keep you balanced, so it makes sense. Oof. The hit cost him 2 months off the field in rehab with medications, but once the issues were cleared, he was able to return to the mound on August 15, 2013. The lucky crash. With only 34 kilometers left, the finish line seemed within reach, yet the universe had other plans. 25-year-old Italian cyclist Vittoria Galzini was competing in the Italian Road Race Championship on June 28, 2025. Only 2 days prior to this race, she had won the time trial championship, so she was obviously in high spirits. However, one turn on the descent changed everything. Vittoria was leading a small group of 5 riders on a descent when she entered a right-hand corner at high speed. And exactly when control mattered most, she lost it and overbraked. This caused the rear wheel to lock up and slide. The bicycle flipped and Vittoria was sent flying into the air before crashing hard into a rock retaining wall on the roadside. At first, anyone watching the video may feel like this was the worst that could happen to a reigning champion. But look closely and you'll see just how narrowly she escaped. The wall she slammed into was only a few feet tall, and past that wall was a steep cut slope. A fall only inches higher could have resulted in much worse outcomes. Hence the reason why the news highlights said that she was saved by an angel. Vittoria received immediate medical attention and, despite the severity of the crash, was able to walk to the ambulance, maybe because most of the impact was taken by her upper body. The injuries included abrasions, bruising in the arms and pelvis, and a forearm fracture, which for a cyclist is considered a big setback. Yet, Vittoria remained optimistic and posted on social media that she would be back as always. And as promised, she returned in October 2025 and contributed to Italy's gold medal in the women's team pursuit. Level 2. Skating on the edge.
Imagine working in an environment where fast-moving blades as sharp as knives fly just inches away from your face. Well, for a pairs figure skater, that is just part of everyday life where the slightest mistake can lead to disaster. And tonight, one couple's horrific accident. We warn you, it is hard to watch. You'll be hoping, as we did, they could come back.
Jessica Dube and Brian Davidson had been skating partners for years, but in 2007, that partnership faced its biggest test. The Canadian duo was competing at the Four Continents Championship and performing quite well until a routine spin went wrong. During a side-by-side camel spin where each skater extends one leg horizontally while rotating, they drifted too close to each other. On the third rotation, Bryce's skate blade struck Jessica's face. The cut was immediate and severe. Jessica collapsed to the ice while clutching her face as blood pooled beneath her. For an elegant sport like figure skating, seeing blood on the ice was horrifying for the audience and for Bryce as well. But he quickly recovered from the shock and rushed to her side. Medical staff followed within seconds, and Jessica was transported to Memorial Hospital in Colorado Springs. There, the extent of the injury became clear.
I just thought he broke my nose because I had like a lot of pain. But then I saw like the blood and everything.
She had suffered a deep laceration across her left cheek and nose where she needed a total of 83 stitches. Yet the doctors called it a miracle because the blade had somehow missed her eye by the smallest margin. And another miracle the fans witnessed was Jessica's resilience. She returned to the ice within 10 days. Not only that, but just a month later, the pair competed at the 2007 World Figure Skating Championships in Tokyo and finished 7th overall. However, while the physical recovery was quick, the emotional recovery took some time. Both, especially Jessica, underwent therapy to rebuild trust and overcome the fear associated with close contact elements. The efforts paid off as they continued competing successfully until 2011, when Bryce's recurring knee problem brought their partnership to an end. Raul Jimenez versus the Arsenal. Head clashes in football are pretty common, but in 2020, one nearly ended a career. On November 29, 2020, Arsenal FC faced Wolverhampton Wanderers FC in a Premier League match at the Emirates Stadium. 5 minutes into the match, Arsenal won a corner kick. Williams stepped in to take it and sent a fast cross into the box. Raul Jimenez and David Luiz both jumped to head the ball at the near post. But as they went up, their heads slammed into each other. David's head struck Raul's head hard and he fell straight to the ground. At first, many expected him to get back up, but he did not move. Soon, blood could be seen coming from his nose and ears. This was the moment when those on the field knew this was something much worse than a simple concussion. Medical staff tried to stabilize him on the field before transporting him to the hospital. On the way, he began to respond, but the danger was not over yet. At the hospital, doctors diagnosed a fractured skull, an intracranial hematoma, which is basically bleeding in the brain, and heavy nasal bleeding. While the game continued normally, holes were being drilled into Raul's skull in an emergency surgery. Thankfully, the operation was successful and he regained consciousness with no signs of permanent brain damage.
Me acuerdo que llegamos al estadio, que salí así a ver el campo, me metí al vestidor y ya no recuerdo nada después de eso. Me acuerdo, sí, que estaba en el hospital, estuve 5 días en el hospital, pero de los 5 días pues no tengo como que gran conocimiento.
The recovery, however, was crucial and long. It took him 8 months to return to the field. And as of early 2026, Raul Jimenez is expected to lead Mexico's attack in the 2026 World Cup. Paul George's exhibition game. In 2014, American basketball player Paul George was at the ultimate peak of his career when he was hit by a setback no one saw coming. A white versus blue intra-squad scrimmage for Team USA at the Thomas & Mack Center was part of preparations for the FIBA Basketball World Cup in Spain. Everything was going smoothly until the fourth quarter. Paul George was chasing down a fast break from James Harden. He went up to contest the layup and landed awkwardly. His right leg slammed into the base of the basketball's hoop support, the heavy pole that holds up the backboard and rim. The fall was accompanied by a cracking sound, followed by bones breaking through Paul's skin and blood poured out.
There goes a little bit too fast for his own good. Nice contest, but a foul. Paul George shaken up. He ran into the stanchion.
The game was immediately called off and George was taken to the hospital.
You know, this is a very tough blow, not so much about us, but about Paul.
Everything's on hold right now, and it should be. It would be so inappropriate for us to talk about anything else when there's a serious injury like this.
There, the broken bones were identified as the tibia and fibula. To repair the open fracture, surgeons inserted a titanium rod in the tibia and stabilized the fibula. The surgery took 2 hours and Paul's leg was immobilized in a cast and boot. In only a few months, he was seen without a brace.
You know, obviously I had other surgeries and injuries down the road that helped. Having gone through breaking my leg, that was the worst one. But understanding how to rehab and how to attack training differently, that kind of set me up to like.
And shortly after, in 2015, he returned to the game with a full recovery. So far, every athlete on this list eventually recovered. But from here on, that's no longer guaranteed. So subscribe, and let's keep going. Level 3. The Bahrain Grand Prix. Racer Romain Grosjean had survived hundreds of high-speed laps in Formula One, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened on the first lap of the 2020 Bahrain Grand Prix. The 34-year-old was driving for the Haas F1 team. As the cars sped through turn 3, Romain made slight contact with another racer, Daniel Kvyat's AlphaTauri. It seemed like a routine racing bump until his Haas shot off the track at over 220 kilometers per hour. Seconds later, it slammed into the triple-layer metal barrier with brutal force. The front pierced through the guardrail, the rear tore away, and fuel exploded into a massive fireball around the cockpit. The scene was absolutely horrifying, and for a moment, survival seemed impossible.
What the f happened there? Get him out.
I think that's Romain Grosjean that has gone into the barriers there. About 140 miles an hour.
Inside the flames, Romain was trapped. His hands were burning through his gloves and smoke filled the cockpit. Yet somehow, he managed to unbuckle his seatbelt, forced himself up, squeezed through the tiny gap between the car and barrier, and climbed out while the inferno raged around him. By the time he reached the medical car, he was conscious and talking.
Can't finish like this, cannot be my last race, it cannot be my last race. So, I thought about my kids and I said, no, I cannot die today. For my kids, I cannot die, I've got to see them.
And given the intensity of the crash, that alone felt like a miracle. One major reason he survived was the halo, which is basically a titanium safety structure that surrounds the cockpit of Formula One cars. And as his fellow racer said, if it weren't for the halo, the metal barrier might have sliced his head off.
Not only has he survived going through a barrier at 160 miles an hour, within a ball of fire, that the heat must have been so extreme. It was a miracle. It was absolutely a miracle.
Romain suffered second-degree burns, and after a couple of months in recovery, he was able to return to racing in 2021. UFC 261 break. On April 24, 2021, at UFC 261, MMA fighter Chris Weidman threw a kick he had practiced hundreds of times before. This time, it changed everything. 13 seconds into the fight against Uriah Hall, Chris launched a hard right leg kick, and Uriah checked it clean with his shin.
Chris Weidman. And Chris Weidman has snapped his left leg.
The crack echoed through the arena. Chris's lower right leg snapped instantly, and both his tibia and fibula broke. Even worse, the fibula tore through the skin. When he tried to step back, his leg folded under him and he collapsed face down on the canvas. This is where it gets disturbing and somewhat hard to explain. 8 years earlier, at UFC 168, Chris had checked Anderson Silva's kick in the exact same way. Anderson's leg had snapped in an almost identical fashion, and now Chris was the one on the canvas. The moment had come full circle. Referee Herb Dean stopped the fight immediately while Uriah was left in complete shock. Medical staff rushed in, Chris was placed into a compression boot, stretchered out, and taken to the hospital. That night, surgeons performed surgery to help stabilize the bones. It was successful, but the recovery was not simple. In the months that followed, Chris faced infections, setbacks, and multiple additional surgeries, but he kept going.
So I initially was super optimistic because I was after surgery. I just figured it was going to be maybe 3-4 days worth of pain. And then I'd be kind of back into it. I've had 23 surgeries, so it's not like it's my first rodeo going through a surgery. This is my 24th surgery, actually.
And in August 2023, after more than 2 years away, Chris returned to the UFC to fight again. Ultimately, Chris Weidman became the only UFC fighter to be part of 2 of the sport's most infamous leg breaks, first as the man who caused it, and later as the one who endured it. Planica Incident 2021. An Olympic gold medalist, a former ski flying world champion. Yet, in one jump, Daniel Andre Tandy lost control of everything. On March 25, 2021, before the final Ski World Cup event, a training camp was being held in Slovenia. Daniel pushed off the top of the Planica ski flying hill during a routine jump. Everything looked normal at takeoff. He settled into flight with his body low and skis stretched wide. However, just after passing the knoll, something went wrong. One ski lost pressure and his balance shifted slightly off-center, and at that speed, slightly is all it takes. His left side dipped, the airflow broke, and instead of floating forward, he dropped from several meters up and slammed into the snow. That impact alone was brutal, but there was no chance to brace. Daniel's body tumbled down the steep slope at a terrifying speed, and by the time he slid into the flat outrun area, he wasn't moving. His heart had stopped beating. Medics rushed onto the hill and began CPR right there in the snow. To restore breathing, he was intubated and treated on site for nearly half an hour before being airlifted to a hospital. The immediate danger had passed. Now came the damage report. Daniel had suffered a punctured lung, 4 separate brain hemorrhages, and a broken collarbone. To control the swelling in his brain, they placed him in a medically induced coma for 4 days. And when he finally woke up, he had no memories of the crash.
Hva er det du husker fra fallet? Husker absolutt ingenting. Siste jeg husker faktisk dagen før vi reiste ned til Slovenia, og så var jeg ute og gikk tur med søsteren og samboeren hennes. Så det det siste jeg husker da. Jeg husker ikke så mye.
Might be kind of a silver lining in that case. I don't think I'd want to remember. Once he was stabilized, another surgery followed for his collarbone. Months of physical and mental rehab came next, and the injury that seemed to be the end of his career only proved to be an obstacle as Daniel returned to the competition later that same year. But he couldn't hold up for long. So in 2024, at only 30 years old, Daniel announced his retirement from the sport and transitioned to coaching. The 400 kilogram squat. It was August 10th, 2020. The World Raw Powerlifting Federation Championships were underway in Dolgopronde, Russia. Powerlifter Alexander Sedik stepped onto the platform to attempt a career-defining squat. 400 kilograms rested across his back. He unracked it cleanly, the walkout was firm, he planted his feet and began lowering with control. Everything looked solid, but as he reached the bottom position, both knees gave out at the same time.
Stój! Dawaj! Stop!
There was an audible, sharp crack as his legs shot forward and folded under the weight. As a result, his body collapsed toward the platform. Spotters quickly got hold of the bar before it could crush him. But the real damage had already been done. Both knees had failed under the load. He couldn't straighten his legs, nor could he support his own weight, so he had to be carried off the stage. At the hospital, the full extent of the damage became clear. Both patellar tendons had ruptured. His left kneecap was fractured and displaced. There was meniscus damage and severe trauma to the surrounding tissue. When he woke up after an emergency surgery, doctors told him he would have to relearn how to walk. Such a devastating change, from lifting record-setting weights at one moment to relearning something you mastered as a toddler. That shift alone is crushing. It's been 6 years since the injury, and Alexander hasn't returned to elite competition yet. I've had a knee injury, and that sounds so much worse, and mine felt unbearable, so... Elite 8 crash. On March 31st, 2013, during an Elite 8 showdown between Louisville and Duke, one clip spread across every screen, not because of a game-winning shot, but because of something far more horrifying than anything basketball was meant to show. The game was intense, and the crowd was roaring with energy. With just over 6 minutes left in the first half, Duke guard Tyler Thornton rose for a three-pointer, and Kevin Ware leapt to contest it. It was the kind of play no one thinks twice about, but as Kevin came down on his right foot, his leg gave way beneath him. What should have been a simple landing turned into something horrifying. His bone snapped on impact, tearing through the skin as his lower leg bent at an unnatural angle. For a split second, people didn't understand what they were seeing. The arena went quiet. Players from both teams looked down and immediately recoiled. Some fell to their knees, others covered their faces. The energy that had filled the building seconds earlier was gone. What made it even more unsettling was that the play had been nothing out of the ordinary. It was a routine jump. The game stopped completely as medical staff rushed in. Kevin remained conscious while they stabilized his leg, and as he was lifted onto a stretcher, he told his teammates to win the game.
Everybody was down and crying and really at loss, but I was telling everybody, let's just win the game.
Whew, I don't think that's where my mind would be, but good for you, Kevin. The injury was graphic, and the replay was everywhere. But it didn't end his career. After months of rehab and rebuilding strength, Kevin Ware returned to the court. The scar was still there, but the leg was strong enough to play again. Level 4. South Carolina's biggest loss. Marcus Lattimore was on the path to greatness, a star running back at South Carolina ready for the NFL. But on October 27, 2012, one hit changed the course of his entire life. During a game against the Tennessee Volunteers, Marcus took a handoff and ran upfield. As he planted his right leg, a defender hit low and his knee bent backward at a painful angle. Marcus immediately collapsed with a visible dislocation in his knee. And this wasn't the first time his body had been tested. Months earlier, he had recovered from a torn ACL, but this injury was far worse. Medical staff rushed him off the field and into surgery with Dr. James Andrews. He had torn 3 of the 4 major ligaments in his knee. The ligaments were repaired and the knee was stabilized, yet despite grueling rehab, it would never hold up to professional play.
Probably the biggest thing that could happen that could affect your future with a knee dislocation is your nerves, and that the nerve that surrounds around the knee, one of those nerves that we always worry about can actually affect your future and give you a permanent paralysis in your lower leg.
By 2014, at only 23, Marcus retired without ever playing on an NFL snap. One moment erased years of preparation. Still, he refused to be defined by that injury. He earned his degree, started a foundation to help injured athletes, and returned to South Carolina to mentor players, proving that while one hit ended a career, it didn't end his impact. Oh, that's a nice story. I like hearing about things with at least a positive spin at the end. Flea flicker gone wrong. On November 18th, 1985, a routine tackle on Monday Night Football ended Joe Theismann's career in seconds. The Washington quarterback was 36 years old and still playing at a high level. It was the second quarter at RFK Stadium. The Redskins called a flea flicker, a trick play where Joe handed the ball off, got it tossed back to him, and rolled out to throw downfield. However, right then, the defense broke through. New York Giants linebacker Lawrence Taylor came from behind. As he wrapped Joe and brought him down, Lawrence's knee struck Joe's lower right leg. The impact snapped both bones in his lower leg.
First and 10, Riggins, flea flicker, back to Theismann in a lot of trouble. And it was Lawrence Taylor who slammed Theismann to the ground at the 42-yard line. The blitz was on. That's not necessarily a good play to have called.
His shin bent sharply, and the break was so severe that one bone tore through the skin. The crack was loud enough to be picked up by the broadcast microphones. I mean, imagine the noise at a football game, and you can still hear a bone crack over that. Whoa. But he was surrounded by other players, so for a moment, the crowd didn't fully understand what they were seeing. Then the reactions said it all. Players started signaling urgently toward the sideline where Joe was on his back, clutching his leg, and the deformity was impossible to ignore. Medical staff hurried onto the field as the stadium grew quiet. They stabilized his leg before carrying him off on a stretcher. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a severe compound fracture of the tibia and fibula. Surgery was performed that night to clean the wound and realign the shattered bones. Joe believed he would recover and return, but the universe had other plans.
The pain was more than I've ever gone through in my life, in any phase of my life. This is not the way I envision of saying goodbye to the game of football. And it's for that reason that I've pretty much set my jaw and want to come back and compete for my job next year.
His leg healed unevenly. After months of rehab and an attempted comeback, he was released.
I learned a great lesson that night, that no matter how great you are at what you do, it can be over in an instant. And that's why every day you have to live your life to the fullest. Every day you have to go after with everything you have, because there's no guarantees for tomorrow.
The tackle didn't just end a season, it ended his career. Also, a lot of stuff about bones breaking through legs in this, and I don't know why, but that is just sending shivers up my spine. The ultimate knee slap. One awkward landing, one wrong angle, and a promising NBA career almost ended before it began. That was Shaun Livingston's February 2007. Shaun was a 21-year-old point guard for the Los Angeles Clippers. During a game against the Charlotte Bobcats, he drove toward the basket and went up for a close shot. He missed, and as he came down, his left leg landed awkwardly, too far forward. And for a moment, everything was a blur, and then his knee collapsed backward with a sickening twist. His kneecap popped out, lower leg snapped laterally, and an audible gasp swept through the Staples Center. Shaun fell screaming to the floor, clutching his knee while teammates and doctors rushed to his side.
Steal by Livingston after good defense by Mobley. No finish though by Shaun, and he's hurt. And Shaun Livingston is really hurt. He dislocated his patella.
The damage was catastrophic. MRI scans revealed nearly every major ligament was torn. Blood vessels had been compromised, and the worst part was that at some point, doctors even had to check for amputation risk. For a young player with his entire career ahead, the news was devastating. After a complex multi-hour reconstruction surgery and nearly 2 years of rehab,
this is what it looks like now.
My knee is doing a lot better, making progress.
Definite progress, but with the goal of February's All-Star break as a hopeful timetable for a return to the NBA, how close is the 21-year-old?
Sean was able to return to light basketball drills in mid-2008.
You know, fear of the unknown is always there. It's being able to wake up the next day. It's a new day. Let's start again. And also have a positive support system. And now to be at this point in my career, come full circle for me.
Eventually, he joined the Golden State Warriors and became a key contributor to their championships. The Bloody Rink. On February 10, 2008, in the HSBC Arena of Buffalo, New York, the ice was painted red, and the crowd held its breath as Richard Zednick was being escorted out of the arena. The Panthers were up against the Buffalo Sabres. During the third period of the game, the Panthers captain, Olli Jonikin, got tangled with an opponent. As he went down, his skate flew up uncontrollably, and that's when the unimaginable happened. The sharp blade sliced directly into Richard Zednick's neck and cut his carotid artery. Blood sprayed across the ice and Richard collapsed, clutching his neck. And in that half-conscious state, Richard skated nearly the full length of the rink toward the bench.
You know what?
It's his neck. They've got a towel on his neck. Dave Zanobi, the trainer, they're getting him right into the dressing room. This is very serious.
Buffalo has seen something terrible in past years.
Trainers were there, but he had already lost 5 pints of blood. Every second mattered. Immediate pressure to the wound, careful stabilization, and a quick stretcher ride to the ambulance kept him alive, but the risk was not over yet.
I went back and talked to Jacques and the referee, and it was confirmed that he was on his way to the hospital and he was stable. There wasn't a lot being said. It was just more concern for Richard.
At Buffalo General Hospital, surgeons worked rapidly to repair the severed artery. Within an hour, Richard's artery was reconnected and his life was saved, though the recovery was long and hard.
When I woke up and what's happening around me, and I got so much support from all the hockey fans from all over the world, from Slovakia, from Buffalo organization, from Florida Panthers organization, and it's been, like I said, a dream.
He missed the rest of the season, but returned to the NHL in the following season to skate, score, and compete at the highest level again. Red Bull Rampage. 2025 was the most brutal year of the Red Bull Rampage event, and here's why. On October 19th, Spanish freestyle mountain biker Adolf Silva attempted a massive double backflip off a towering step-down feature. The rotation started clean, but midway through, something went wrong.
Adolf Silva is just a bull.
With all he's been through so far this week, this is a heavyweight boxer up against the ropes, determined to win the match.
He failed to complete the second flip. His front wheel caught the landing while his body kept moving. What followed was a violent and immediate fall. Adolf slammed head first into the rocky slope and tumbled down the face of the cliff. As soon as the crash happened, medics sprinted in and Adolf was immediately airlifted to St. George Regional Hospital. This was reported as the most brutal crash of the event, but the day wasn't over yet. Shortly after the competition resumed, Swedish rider Emil Johansson dropped into his line. Near the top ridge, he lost control at high speed. His bike bucked and disintegrated as he cartwheeled down the mountainside, coming to rest far below the feature. Emil lay stranded on the slope. His right hip had dislocated severely, due to which he could barely move. The competition was paused again. Another helicopter flew in and Emil was airlifted out of the valley. Later updates made the damage clear. Adolf Silva had fractured vertebrae, suffered major spinal damage, and was left paralyzed from the chest down. A 28-year-old was left with life-altering trauma. On the other hand, Emil faced surgery and a long recovery from hip damage. And perhaps the most disturbing part, was what happened next, or rather, what didn't. Despite two of the most horrifying crashes in Rampage history, the event resumed as if the mountain hadn't just sent two athletes to the hospital. By sunset, scores were tallied and winners were crowned, but after what everyone had witnessed, it just didn't feel the same. What makes it even more unsettling is that those two crashes weren't isolated incidents. Over the course of the week, 8 riders suffered significant injuries, 5 during practice and 3 during finals. Yet, the competitions with such extreme and known risks continue. The triple tackle. On March 24, 2014, 22-year-old Alex McKinnon went into the tackle standing strong. After the first half, he left it unable to move. A National Rugby League match was going on between the Newcastle Knights and the Melbourne Storm. Newcastle's Alex carried the ball into contact late in the first half. 3 defenders met him, one lifted him while the others drove forward. In a split second, his body was tipped past horizontal. Instinctively, Alex tucked his chin, but instead of landing on his back, he was driven straight down onto his head and neck. The full weight of the tacklers came down on top of him, and the impact compressed his spine instantly. He didn't get up. For several excruciatingly long seconds, he lay on the grass, screeching in pain. Players from both teams stepped back and the stadium grew quiet. Something was clearly wrong.
Oh, he's in trouble, boy. That was nasty the way he went into the ground.
Lifting. He's got him in he's put him in a dangerous spot, mate.
Oh, he just ducked his head in.
Now, an important point here is that in rugby league, you cannot lift a player and drive them headfirst into the ground. The rule exists to protect the spine. In Alex's case, the tackle involved a lifting motion that tipped him beyond horizontal before he was driven downward. And even though there was no clear intent to injure, the position itself was dangerous. Medical staff rushed onto the field as the game stopped. Alex couldn't move his arms or legs, so he was carefully placed into a stretcher and taken from AAMI Park to the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne. Scans revealed fractures to the vertebrae in his neck. His spinal cord had been severely injured, so doctors placed him into a medically induced coma to reduce swelling and protect what function remained.
Damaging the spinal cord will be diagnosed as a quadriplegic. That means there is total to partial paralysis of all 4 limbs, and that is the circumstance facing Alex McKinnon. It is a devastating diagnosis, and it's had people right across Australia in shock.
At first, there was hope, but in the days that followed, reality set in. The injury was permanent. Alex McKinnon was left quadriplegic, paralyzed from the chest down with limited movement in the arms.
When I was playing football, I was only young. I was only 22 years old, so I had a lot to learn, but I felt like I was really trapped. I believe that what happened to me was meant to happen, but I'm so grateful with what I have in my life.
As for the tacklers involved, they were only suspended for several games. Level 5. Philip Hughes' freak accident. A cricket ball changed everything in a split second. It was November 25th, 2014, at the Sydney Cricket Ground. 25-year-old Philip Hughes was batting for South Australia in a domestic Sheffield Shield match. He had been playing well, timing his shots and building confidence with every run. By the afternoon, he was on 63 runs, facing a fast delivery from New South Wales' Sean Abbott. On the 3rd ball of the 48th over, Sean bowled a short-pitched bouncer. Philip went for a hook shot, trying to hit the ball over the leg side, but he misjudged it. The ball slipped past his bat and struck him on the side of his neck, just under the helmet, hitting a spot no protective gear covered. Philip stumbled for a moment, placing his hands on his knees, then collapsed forward. The stadium fell silent. Players, officials, and bowlers ran to his side. Doctors quickly arrived, supporting his head and neck, checking his breathing. He was unconscious and unresponsive. Medics stabilized him and rushed him off the field in an ambulance. At St. Vincent's Hospital, scans revealed a tear in one of the arteries in his neck, causing rapid internal bleeding in the brain.
It was an injury to the neck that caused hemorrhage in the brain. This condition is incredibly rare. It's called vertebral artery dissection, leading to subarachnoid hemorrhage is the medical term for it. And if you look in the literature, there's only about 100 cases ever reported. So this is incredibly rare. Only one previous case ever reported.
An emergency surgery was performed and Philip was placed in medically induced coma to control swelling. Family and teammates hoped for a miracle, but it never happened. Despite the rapid medical response and multiple interventions, Philip's condition worsened. On November 27, 2014, just 2 days after that fateful shot, Philip Hughes passed away at the age of 25. His death shocked the cricket world. The rare and devastating injury led to changes in helmet design and stricter safety measures for players. The X Games. The commentators said he's okay. Yet a week later, the world received the news it was never ready for.
An extreme snowmobiler is being remembered this morning for his innovative and freewheeling style. 25-year-old Caleb Moore was seriously injured last week attempting a backflip at the X Games, and when it all went wrong, he suffered a concussion and then was hospitalized. He died yesterday after complications from that concussion and bleeding around his heart.
On January 24, 2013, 25-year-old Caleb Moore, a fearless snowmobile freestyle rider, approached the finals jump at Buttermilk Mountain in Aspen. The Winter X Games crowd held its breath as he revved his sled and launched into the air for a backflip. The move was clean at first, but right when he was about to touch ground, disaster struck. The landing came too soon. One of the skis caught the edge of the slope, halting the rotation abruptly. Caleb was flung forward and the snowmobile flipped on top of him. For a moment, he was under the machine's weight. Silence fell over the course as medics rushed in. Shockingly, he managed to push himself free. With help, he staggered off the snow, breathing heavily yet seemingly alive. The crowd exhaled a sigh of relief. However, it was a little too soon for that. He was airlifted to St. Mary's Hospital in Grand Junction. The injuries seemed minor, but beneath the surface, the trauma was severe. Internal bleeding in the chest strained his heart, while pressure in the brain quietly worsened. Each day brought new complications until it all came down to the fact that Caleb's condition couldn't be reversed. So on January 31st, 1 week after the fatal jump, Caleb Moore became the first athlete in X Games history to die from injuries sustained during a competition. Number 21. The crowd roared when their favorite midfielders scored an equalizer, but only a second later, there was complete and utter silence. It was October 14th, 2014. Bethlehem Vengthong FC was facing Chanmari West FC in a heated Mizoram Premier League match. The score was tight and the tension was high. In the 62nd minute, Peter Biaksengzwala, the team's 23-year-old midfielder, rose to meet a rebound off a free kick and headed the ball into the net, leveling the game. The crowd erupted in cheers, waving flags and chanting. Caught up in that moment, Peter decided to celebrate in style. He had practiced aerobic flips before and wanted to perform a series of them on the pitch, largely inspired by his favorite footballers. He started with a front handspring and a cartwheel, landing it perfectly. Right after, he went for a second flip. And that was when things went horribly wrong. He didn't rotate fully in the air and landed head first onto the hard ground. The impact was immediate. His neck and upper back took the brunt, and he lay motionless as the noise of the stadium vanished into stunned silence. Medics stabilized him before placing him on a stretcher. The good news was that he was conscious, But the bad news was that he could barely move. At the hospital, doctors confirmed a spinal injury. Over the next few days, Peter's condition remained critical. On October 19th, only 5 days after the match, he passed away. And, in his loving memory, Bethlehem Vengthon FC retired his number 21 jersey. Level 6. F1's wake-up call. 1994 was a brutal year for Formula One, but it also taught lessons that would change the sport forever. In April, Rubens Barrichello suffered a serious crash, and the next day, Roland Ratzenberger lost his life in a qualifying accident. On the weekend after, Ayrton Senna, a three-time Formula One champion, was planning to honor Roland upon victory during the San Marino Grand Prix at Imola, but he had no idea what fate had in store for him. The race began at 2 p.m. Ayrton pulled ahead, carefully navigating the first few laps under a safety car while keeping a close gap to his competitors. By lap 7, racing was back to full speed and Ayrton was comfortably leading, pushing his Williams FW16 down the high-speed Tamburello corner at over 300 kilometers per hour. Then, the unthinkable happened. As he entered the left-hand curve, the car inexplicably veered straight, running wide across the asphalt. Ayrton's steering showed no corrective output, and the car struck the concrete wall almost head-on. The force of the crash was devastating as the far front wheel was completely torn off, suspension parts broke, and worst of all, a fragment of metal struck Ayrton's helmet. It fractured his skull and the metal cut deep into his brain. Helicopters airlifted him to Major Hospital in Boulogne. Doctors performed emergency treatment, but the injuries were catastrophic. Only hours later at 6:40 p.m., Ayrton Senna was pronounced dead.
Good evening. Ayrton Senna, 3 times world motor racing champion, has died after crashing during the San Marino Grand Prix. Senna suffered irreversible brain damage when his car veered off the track at almost 200 miles an hour. He was taken to hospital in nearby Bologna, but he died a few hours later.
His death sparked a revolution in Formula One safety, which mainly included stronger cockpits, the Hans device, redesigned tracks, and a 20-year span without another fatality in a race. Slide of Doom. Just hours before the opening ceremony of the 2010 Winter Olympics, a 21-year-old athlete was taking what should have been an ordinary training run. Georgian athlete Nodar Kumaritashvili grew up sliding down icy tracks in Georgia, chasing fractions of a second in one of the fastest sports on Earth. That morning, at the Whistler Sliding Center, he pushed off from the men's start for a final practice run before the competition. The track was arguably the fastest Olympic luge course ever built. As he at those speeds, even a minor deviation can be critical. So he attempted a correction, but that didn't work either. In fact, it worsened the situation. Instead of settling, the sled climbed high up in the wall of the curve, and in a split second, it snapped back violently. The force ejected Nodar out of his seat, launching him over the sidewall of the track. And beyond that, the ice barrier was an unpadded steel support pole. Nodar struck it at full speed. The impact was catastrophic. He collapsed motionless beside the tracks as officials and medics rushed in immediately. CPR was performed on the scene before he was airlifted to a nearby hospital.
Chris, have you ever seen an accident like that before?
No, I've never seen anyone fly off the track. We see sleds flying out of the track every once in a while, but nothing like that.
But the severe blunt force trauma to the head and chest was hard to recover from. Later that same day, Nodar was pronounced dead.
Because of the compassion and the solidarity that we felt from everyone around us. Despite of this tragic event, our team will carry on with the dream of Nodar and compete on his honor.
The tragedy stunned the Olympic community. The Games opened under a shadow of grief, and to honor Nodar, Georgian athletes marched wearing black armbands. Turn 11 disaster. Known for his aggressive style and wild maneuvers, Marco Simoncelli was a fearless force on the track, but even the bravest can be caught off guard. It was October 23, 2012 at the Sepang International Circuit in Malaysia. After a slight delay, the MotoGP race started around 2 p.m., and Marco on his San Carlo Honda Gresini RC212V was off to a strong start. By lap 2, he was running fourth, pushing hard through turn 11, a tricky right-hand corner that led onto a long straight. Suddenly, the front of his bike lost grip. Marco slid toward the inside of the corner to avoid the crash. And for a moment, it did seem like he would recover, but then the bike snapped back into the racing line as the tires regained grip. In an instant, he was in the path of two riders behind him, Colin Edwards and Valentino Rossi. Colin struck him first, dislodging his helmet, and Rossi followed, colliding with his chest and neck. The impacts were violent and immediate. Marco lay motionless on the asphalt. Medics rushed to the scene, and the race was immediately red flagged. He was stabilized on the track and transported to the Circuit Medical Center before being airlifted to the hospital. Despite rapid response and emergency cares, the injuries were too catastrophic. There was massive trauma to his head, neck, and chest.
A bad crash occurred to him during the race. He was hit by other riders, and he reported very important trauma to the head, to the neck, and to the chest. When our medical staff arrived on him, he was unconscious. We thought to help him as long as we thought it was possible.
At 4:54 p.m., less than 3 hours after the crash, Marco Simoncelli was pronounced dead. The racing world was stunned.
In 2011 happened the crash of Marco. It was a very bad feeling for everybody because it was our friend, you know. When I go back and I see the image of the crash in the television, and I say, is a disaster.
Tributes poured in from fellow riders, teams, and fans worldwide, honoring the Italian rider's fearless spirit.
4:56, 2 weeks ago at Sepang in Malaysia, we lost a true gladiator in the MotoGP World Championships.
Every single one of them is out there.
It's a very close knit family travelling the world together, and when they lose one of their favourite sons, everybody mourns together as well.
Now, Marco's legacy lives on in improved helmet standards, memorials at circuits, and the enduring memory of number 58. Level 7. 3 Strikes of Fate. On November 13th, 1982, the matchup in the ring looked completely one-sided. In one corner stood Ray Mancini, a young, undefeated world champion and one of boxing's rising stars. In the other was Duk-Koo Kim, a relatively unknown challenger from South Korea. Most fans expected a routine title defense, another quick victory for their favorite. Instead, they witnessed one of the most tragic nights in boxing history. From the opening bell at Caesar's Palace in Las Vegas, Duk-Koo refused to play the role of underdog. He pressed forward relentlessly, absorbing heavy punches but continuing to attack. Ray landed powerful combinations that left Duk-Koo's face swollen and bruised. Ray himself also suffered damage. His eyes started swelling badly and his hand was injured early, but it was nothing compared to Duk-Koo's condition. As the rounds carried on, the difference in their strengths became clearer. By rounds 11, 12, and 13, Duk-Koo was visibly exhausted. His legs trembled, his guard dropped. Still, he would not quit. Ray knocked him down in the 11th, yet Duk-Koo rose again, determined to continue. Then came the 14th round. Just 19 seconds in, Ray unleashed a sharp combination. Duk-Koo collapsed backwards onto the canvas. He struggled to his feet using the ropes, but the referee stopped the fight. Moments later, Duk-Koo fell unconscious. He was rushed to the hospital where doctors discovered severe bleeding in his brain. Despite emergency surgery, he died 4 days later at just 27 years old. The tragedy did not end there, though. Only 2 months after Dukku's death, his mother took her oath. She largely blamed herself for Dukku's death, so she drank a bottle of pesticide and passed away in January. 7.5 months later, the referee Richard Green also followed suit, and the main reason was his guilt over not stopping the fight sooner.
I used to say, look, you're gonna have to kill me to beat me for my title. In your heart, you'll fight to the death for that, because that means so much to you. But it's a figurative, not literal. Trainer said he brought a coffin, he put it in the room when he was training. In this sense, he said, either I'm coming home with that or Mancini's going home with that. That's scary.
The sport responded by permanently reducing championship bouts from 15 rounds to 12, which inevitably raises the question of whether this tragedy could have been prevented. The 1955 Le Mans disaster. It was supposed to be the crown jewel of motorsport, yet it became the deadliest accident in motorsport history. The 1955 24 Hours of Le Mans wasn't just another race, it was the race. The ultimate test of speed, endurance, and engineering. Manufacturers treated it like a war. Win, and your brand ruled the world. Lose, and your name will be buried in history. That year, the hype was electric. Mercedes-Benz had returned to Le Mans after more than 2 decades away with its futuristic silver 300 SLR. Across from them stood Jaguar cars, defending champions with the lightning-fast D-Type. The rivalry drew immense attention. Over 250,000 spectators packed the Cirque at Le Mans. Families stood along the main street, some on small dirt embankments separated by only a low barrier from cars traveling 150 miles per hour. It felt dangerous, but that was part of the thrill. For the first 2 hours, the race went on as expected. Then, just after 6:26 p.m., a sequence of routine racing decisions aligned in the worst way possible.
When the greatest sports car event of the year, the Le Mans 24-hour race, opens in brilliant sunshine, none of the 250,000 crowd suspect the tragedy that lies ahead.
A leading Jaguar braked suddenly to enter the pits for fuel. The car behind swerved, and behind them, approaching even faster, was French driver Pierre Levegh in the silver Mercedes. And he had little time to react. His car struck the rear of the slower vehicle, and the impact lifted the Mercedes off the ground. It cleared the barrier and crashed into the spectator area. Where it hit the embankment, the car exploded apart. The magnesium body ignited in a blinding white fire. The engine block tore loose and metal fragments shot into spectators at full velocity. Pierre Levegh died instantly. More than 80 spectators were killed. Hundreds were wounded. And here's the most shocking detail. Despite the scale of the disaster, the race continued. Officials believed stopping it would create panic and block emergency access. So while bodies were being covered and the injured carried away, cars continued screaming down the straight. These were all sports incidents where risk is always part of the game. But how did people end up dying on live TV? Find out in the most disturbing TV accidents iceberg.